My name is Stanley Jones. I was born in Oak Park, Illinois. In 1931, we moved to Massachusetts. This was in the height of the Depression, so my father was fortunate enough to have a job. So he moved with the job, and we moved with him.
Wow, he was lucky too. What kind of job did he get?
He was
the Depression?
He was a purchasing agent for a furniture factory, and he worked very hard at what he did, and he was a likable guy, so it worked out. And looking back, I was very fortunate because my father worked the entire time during the Depression, and that was something that a lot of people didn't have, frankly. I didn't realize it until later, but we were very fortunate. And then went to Gardner High School, graduated in '47. I was a Massachusetts State and New England champion backstroker on the swimming team, but that was about all the athletics I did. It was a pretty concentrated effort back then. I went to BU, Boston University, for a year, but I was more enamored of the social life than I was the educational life, so I then went to Nichols College, where I graduated in 1950 with a business administration degree.
What happened at BU? You graduate?
I was, let's say I matriculated at Simmons, which was only down the block. I was having too much of a good time at 18. Wasn't paying attention to the details.
So you transferred to another college?
Yes,
Good.
yes.
What did you study?
Business. I got an ABA when I graduated. I graduated the same month the Korean War started, 1950. June of 1950. And I went back home and I started working in this furniture factory in sales and really doing nothing but detail work, which was totally uninspiring, but I knew I was going to be drafted pretty soon, and so did my employers. So there was not much point in giving me too much responsibility because I wouldn't be able to utilize it.
So what happened? Were you drafted or did you enlist?
Well, I enlisted because at the time, if you were drafted for 2 years, you then had to serve 6 years in the reserve. And several of my friends, World War II buddies, were being called up because of the Korean conflict, because they were in the reserves or some kind of reserve. So I thought, well, I don't think I want to be in a reserve after being in the service. So you could enlist for 3 years in an army and have no reserve obligation, which is what I did. And the Navy, Air Force, and Marines were all 4 years at the time. So I took the lesser of evils, let's say.
You said 4 years for Air Force, Marine, and Navy?
Yes. March 5 in 1951.
March
5, 1951. And went to Fort Devens, which was fairly near our house. And they give you a battery of tests, which I took, and I did fairly well in the mathematics end of it. So when it came time to divide all these young men into where they were going to go, they took the people with the highest math test scores and sent them to Fort Tilden, New York, and the rest went to Fort Dix. Fort Dix was infantry. Fort Tilden was an experiment for the anti-aircraft artillery. We went there, about 60 to 70 of us, and they gave us 12 weeks of nothing but learning about a 90 millimeter cannon. That was it, and the usual drilling and marching, but no small arms, or anything like that. At the end of 12 weeks, we got a 1-week small arms vacation at Fort Dix. We came right back again. Well, this was about the middle of June, and my now wife and I decided we should get married in that 2 or 3 or 4 day period we had before I was sent someplace else. So I got a 5-day pass, and we got married. And we got married on June 30, and then came right back to where Fort Tilden was, in the Rockaways in New York, the very western end of Long Island, and discovered that I was going to be put into the 69th AAA Gun Battalion, which was the only regular Army unit I was in the entire 3 years I was in the service. It was an astounding unit. It was extraordinarily good in everything it did, and while it was hard work, the enlisted men were treated quite well.
So was there a difference in treatment between
later
drafted and enlisted?
No, there was a difference. Later on, I was with the National Guard unit, and there was quite a difference, and I'll tell you about that. But we wound up in Fort Tilden, basically on the beach there, and within 2 weeks, we were transferred by convoy to Cape Cod. I thought it was going to be at Camp Edwards, which is a big base near Sandwich, but we arrived there and were immediately pushed out to North Truro. It was a town of about 400 people right on the tip end of the Cape, and there were 200 or so of us in the anti-aircraft battery, Baker Battery, and we bivouacked right next to an air base that had long-range radar acquisition radar. They had what they called Texas Towers out in the ocean, 3 of them, and then this one base in North Truro, and they rotated crews in and out of the land base to the ocean base. And it was all secret and hush-hush, and we were really allowed in the fence, so we stayed out in our tents on the other side of the fence. And for the next 4 months or so, we taught Army and Air Force officers how the radar worked between the Air Force and the anti-aircraft air defense commands. A ballistic meteorologist measures the weather, manufactures a 10-line code that they put into the computers of guns, and in the case of an anti-aircraft gun, it gives the weather correction for a projectile going up to as high as 36,000 feet. In field artillery, it gives the weather correction of a projectile going up and coming down. It's the same thing as the adjustment on a rifle, except it's a lot larger. And I went to school for that. I was in the 69th on the Cape. We came back in September, and for the next 4 months, I was stationed in the field in New York City. I was in the Bronx in a dump. They put us on top of a landfill, and in December they put us in the parking lot of Aqueduct Racetrack, and the unions would not allow us to build Quonset huts, so we lived in tents. And I got kind of tired of that, so I volunteered for a school, and it happened to be ballistic meteorology. So come January, I went out to Fort Sill, Oklahoma.
You mean 1952?
That's correct, January of 52.
Mm-hmm.
Went out to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and spent 4 months, a little bit more, learning how to measure weather and all aspects of that. That was a fun time because I was going to school without extra duties, no guard duty, no.
How much were you paid at the time?
Probably with the allotment for my wife, it would be $125 a month, and then there was another $20, something like that, for combat pay.
Okay.
But you didn't get that in Fort Sill or New York City.
Right.
So
So when did you leave for Korea?
well, I came back from Fort Sill as a bona fide ballistic meteorologist, and we had a meteorological station on Staten Island in Fort Wadsworth, right under what is now the Verrazano Bridge. And for a couple of months I worked there, and then there was a National Guard unit in New York City that was called up, an anti-aircraft National Guard unit that was called up to go to Korea. And the TO&E, the Troop Organization and Equipment Forum, said you had to have 4 ballistic meteorologists to go with them, because that's what it called for.
You were not at the National Guard, right?
No, I was regular Army.
Right.
So they looked for people that had at least a year and a half of service to go, that had ballistic meteorological training. And on the East Coast, there were only 3 people, of which I was one.
Wow.
So that was good luck and bad luck. So come September, we sailed, this whole unit moved as a unit, and I was part of the unit. As I said, it was a New York National Guard, but there were, well, in the headquarters company, there were probably 8 or 10 regular Army people that supplemented them. In the ballistic meteorological, they were all regular Army. So we left in a boat out of New York Harbor in September, and we went to Puerto Rico, and then we went to Cartagena, Colombia, and then through the Panama Canal to Hawaii, then to Tokyo, Japan, and then eventually into Busan. It was a small boat, but we had multiple nationalities. It was, you understand, this was a UN Army by then, not just a United States Army. We were operating under the UN. So we arrived at Busan sometime in October. We were 1952. We were 45 days on a troop ship, which is not something to be desired, that's for sure. We landed at Busan as a unit, and as a unit, we moved to Yeongdong-po on the train, a narrow gauge train. I would never seen a narrow gauge train before. It took us all night and part of the next day to do it. It wasn't that far. We just only moved about 10 miles an hour, 15 miles an hour. When we arrived at Yeongdong-po, I guess the unit was issued tents, and we took a truck convoy to Suwon, over on the west coast, below Incheon. And we set up our tents there, and as soon as the tents were set up, we started operating the meteorological section, which was very primitive by current standards, or even standards then. There was no electronics. It was just visual with the balloons and radio. Later, I was transferred to the 44th Brigade. I said there was a difference between National Guard and regular Army, and it was most pronounced in this unit that I was in. We were there 6 weeks, 7 weeks, certainly no longer than 8 weeks, when the commanding officer and the executive officer were both relieved of duty by the Inspector General's office. it was a total shambles, and the men were treated extraordinarily poorly. And when the IG stepped in, they put a regular Army colonel in his place, and things got better there. But the one thing that did happen was they transferred the 3 ballistic meteorologists that we had to the 44th Brigade. The 44th Brigade was located in Suwon. Correction, it was located in Osan. But they had 2 ballistic meteorological units. One is in Pusan and one was in Sosa. In Sosa, we were halfway between Yeongdeungpo and Seoul and Incheon, and we were right next to, well, within 5 miles of Kimpo Air Base and Seoul Air Base, so that our ballistic meteorological messages would cover Incheon to Seoul, east and west, and the line was within 15 miles of us. So it also covered field artillery that was on the line on the far west coast. One night, the fellow dropping the mortar shells off the side hit a fuel dump in Incheon, and it burned for 3 or 4 days. And we were miles from Incheon, 10 miles maybe.
When was that? Do you remember?
53.
Of what month?
Probably April, maybe May. It was warm, fairly warm.
You arrived in Busan 19...
Arrived in Busan 1952, probably October.
October?
Yeah. And I left in February 1954. February
Okay.
1954.
And on average, how often did you get these air raids from North Korea in any form?
Oh.
How often? Once
Not,
a week?
no, it was very scattered. Probably only 6 or 7 times during the war. Probably only 6 or 7 times. So
air raid from North Korea only 6 to 7 times?
Yeah, because they really couldn't fly much in the wintertime. It was pretty cold, and there were open cockpits, you understand.
Were there any real dangerous moment that you might lose your life, might be killed?
Yeah. I said we were near Kimpo and Yeongdeungpo, and there was a lot of anti-aircraft weapons there. And they were mostly 50 caliber, 40 millimeter, and 90 millimeter. Well, I never had any experience with the 90 millimeter, but when we were in Sosa, we were on top of a hill, and the hill was 108, which meant it was 108 meters up off the Han River Valley floor. And it was the only hill around. And so when this plane had come around, it would, to get away from the radar, it would go around our hill, so it would be in the shadow of the hill. And there would be anti-aircraft weapons firing at him during this period of time. So when he went around our hill would come under fire from the Americans. And we had a hut built out of packing crates, and we'd be lying in the bunks at night, and all of a sudden they'd have 50 caliber rounds coming through our hut. So we were in danger of it, but it was minimal.
How was your life there? I mean, where did you sleep? What kind of food did you eat? And have you ever been back to the rear so that you could have a vacation? How much were you paid? What did you do while you were off duty or things like that?
Off duty, we worked 24 on and 24 off. And once I had 5 days off, and they sent us to R&R in Japan. The rest of the time we worked 7 days a week, 24 on, 24 off. There were 12 of us on this hill, and there were no officers there. I never saw an officer at our site the entire time I was there. It was run by a master sergeant, and I was number 2 in command. We weren't in a tent then. We were in a hut made out of packing crates, and we had a stove that was oil-fed, and it kept us pretty warm. We were detached service, meaning that we were in the 44th Brigade, but we were detached from the 44th, attached to an anti-aircraft unit that was in the area. When we were on 24, we did nothing but meteorological work and sleep. And when we were off duty, then we took care of our personal weapons, and we had a couple of 50 caliber machine guns that we had to keep operational, and we had to keep the area clean. We had to get supplies. We used a tremendous amount of water, because the only way you can get a balloon up in the air is to have it filled with hydrogen. And we mix calcium hydride with water, and it makes a gas, hydrogen, and we put that in the balloon, and then we could send it up. Hydrogen is very explosive. The Hindenburg, for instance, is an example of what happens when you don't use it correctly. And go down into the Han River, where they had water purification units, and we'd get some there. It was so routine that I'd completely forgotten all about it. We were busy, not stressed out busy, but busy on our day off. But we didn't have time to do anything.
Did you write back to your wife? I mean, it must have been very difficult for you to be separated, right?
It was, and I was about the only married guy around. I was also older than they were. I was 22, 23, and the rest of the guys were, except for the master sergeant, the rest of the guys were 19 and 20. But there was a gap that was noticeable. I also was the master sergeant and I were the only ones that were RA. No, one other corporal was an RA also.
What do you mean RA?
A regular Army.
Okay.
So you can tell just by looking at a guy's DD-214 whether he enlisted, whether he was National Guard,
So
whatever.
you said RA, regular Army, O is an officer, and then...
O is an officer no matter what.
Right. And then...
The enlisted men are regular Army.
Yeah.
U.S., which is a draftee.
Draftee.
NG, which is National Guard.
NG is National Guard. Okay.
So
you wrote back to your wife?
I wrote to my wife every single day, and she wrote to me every single day. And in the 50 years or 60 years since then, I still have all of her letters at home.
All of your letters?
All of the letters she wrote. I don't know where mine are.
You said that you've been back to Korea 2004.
Yes.
Was it through Revisit program?
Yes, it was through Revisit, and I was able to take the number 1 grandson, Jay, with me. And we spent, I think it was 6 days in the Seoul, Incheon area, and Panmunjom and all that. And then we spent a week in Beijing as well, which was quite enlightening both to him and to me. We visited the Korean War Museum in Beijing, and we were only allowed in certain sections of it, and all they had was 2 helmets and a rifle, which I thought was rather sparse, given the fact that the Chinese were in it for so long.
How did you feel when you went back to Korea where you fought.
I couldn't believe the difference. It was astounding to me. When I was there, I saw maybe 3 trees, and they were along the same road.
3 trees.
Three trees. That was it. It was a $500 fine for cutting a tree down, but that was sort of laughable because there were no trees to cut down where we were. But when I went back in 2004, it was just like New England. There were maple trees and oak trees, and it was just loaded with trees. And instead of that bleak, barren countryside that we remember, it was very pleasant, very nice. And when I went back, I was by myself at this point. I took the subway train from Seoul to Sosa. I couldn't believe that either. And I got out of the subway train into the subway station and looked around in amazement. I walked out. I figured that Sosa had a population of about 70 to 100 people when I left. And those people lived in mud huts with thatched roofs. That's the way it was. And the lucky 1 or 2 had a pig. And that's all. And it was very, very poverty-stricken. Well, the war had been through that section 4 times. There wasn't much left. So I walked out of the subway station and looked up, and all I saw were cement buildings, skyscrapers that were 50 stories high. And I had 2 photographs of the people that I knew back then. And I said to myself, there's no way I can find them, because the population now is about 250,000. So I said, well, I might as well just take the train back. So I turned around, and as I did, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a police station there. So I walked into the police station. And they were very nice. They didn't speak English very well, but then again, I didn't speak Korean very well. But I walked in and I said that I was a veteran. Oh, and I had a badge on me it was the Korean Secret Service, because we had lunch the day before with the president of Korea. And I had a badge on me that said I was Stan Jones from the United States, and I was a Korean veteran.
In Korean?
In Korea.
Okay. I mean, the badge in Korean or English?
Both.
Okay,
it was in
good.
both. And I walked in, and the badge got a lot of attention. And they were very solicitous of me. And I said that I'd stationed here in Sosa in 1952 and 3, or 1953. And I was looking for the hill I was stationed on. And I said it was Hill 108. That's all I know about it. It was 108 meters tall. I said it was 2 kilometers north of the main east-west highway. There was only one at the time. I said it was 2 kilometers north. So they got out a topographical map.
Really? They understood what you're saying?
Well, it wasn't as quickly as I'm doing it now, yes.
Good.
Eventually they did. So they say, well, this is 2 kilometers, and they got the right road, and they went across like this, and they found a hill that was 108 meters tall. It was 2 kilometers north of where I was, and so they said, get in the cruiser. I got in the cruiser, and 2 policemen took me to this hill, and we walked up, and the first 2/3 of the hill was a children's playground, and beyond that it was just trees and bushes, but with granite steps all the way to the top. So we had to crawl over the fence in order to get up there. Got up there to the top of it, and there was a great big monument up there, and it was very stylistic of 2 or 3 people, and it was all in Korean, and I had no idea what it was. But I took a couple of pictures of it, and I sent them.
Well, it's a memorial for the Korean War, right?
I have no idea.
Oh, okay.
I have no idea, but I took a picture of it and sent it to one of my buddies that was with me up on the hill, and said they'd erected a monument to us on top of the hill. Because well, even you being from Korea, how old are you?
I am 52.
Okay, so this was 10 years before you were born. But even at the time you were born, if you could remember what it looked like when you were born, you wouldn't recognize it. Now, living in Seoul as you did, you probably saw more modern things growing up than the people that lived halfway down the peninsula did. It was remarkable. I understand that the first 20 years or so, not much happened. They were basically recovering from the war, getting their act together and getting the people together. And then after that, they started to really move out. And I don't know how much help they got, but whatever help they got, they utilized to the maximum. When I came back in '54, the question I remember most was, where have you been? So now I can say, okay, this is where I was. That used to incense me when people said that.
Right.
I think it's a very good idea to keep this memory going for the people that have not studied it or not been there. I think that's very good, because unless you know what has happened, you're bound to repeat some of these things. But I think that unless the kids are pointed in this direction, they won't know about it, because it's nothing that's brought up casually at all. It has to be focused. And the kids have to be focused.
Mm-hmm.
We give a scholarship. Our chapter gives a scholarship every year. And we've been doing this now for 5 or 6 years, maybe a little longer. And it has brought a lot of attention of some of the young people to this Korean War.
And I want to present a medal and a certificate from the Ministry of Patriots and Veterans Affairs for your service.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stan, for your service from October 1952 to February 1954.
Right.
You've been separated from your lovely wife, Mary Lou Jones, right?
Yep, right.
And now you are happy together, right?
As happy as a clam.
Yeah, let me close off for your name in Korean, Stanley Jones.